My grandma's old chest was one of those things you see in antique shops but never really look at. Dark, heavy wood, smelling faintly of cedar and mothballs, a silent monument to a life lived. After she passed, it fell to me, Lars, to sort through it. For hours, it was just a gentle, dusty trip down memory lane. Faded photos of family picnics, her nursing school pins, my grandpa's military medals tarnished with honor and time, a lock of my mother's baby hair tied with a blue ribbon. Sentimental stuff, comforting even. I thought I knew every story those objects held, every memory they were meant to preserve. Then my fingers brushed against something tucked beneath the worn velvet lining at the very bottom. It wasn't soft like the rest of the keepsakes. It was a thick, folded document, wrapped in wax paper that had gone brittle and translucent with age. It felt strangely cool and slick against my dusty fingertips. I almost dismissed it as an old property deed or something equally boring. But Grandma wasn't one for boring documents. She kept things that mattered. Curiosity got the better of me. The sound it made as I unfolded it was like dry leaves skittering across pavement, a delicate, crackling protest. The paper beneath was heavy, official. The first thing I saw was the letterhead, crisp and official, State of Oregon, County of Clackamas, Office of the Medical Examiner. My blood went cold before I even read the name. It was a death certificate. My eyes scanned down, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. The name, typed in stark, unforgiving letters from what must have been an old typewriter, was Finn Anderson, my father's name. My brain did this weird stutter step, like a film reel snagging on a single frame. It refused to process the information. A prank, a mistake, some bizarre, cruel coincidence involving a distant relative with the same name, but the details were too specific. Date of birth, place of birth, it was him, there was no doubt. I felt a wave of nausea, the dusty air in the attic suddenly feeling thick and suffocating. My dad was very much alive. He'd called me just that morning to complain about the squirrels eating his birdseed. I could still hear his booming laugh as he described a particularly fat one hanging upside down from the feeder. Then my gaze fell on the date of issuance. October 17th, 1988. I dropped the paper as if it had burned my skin. I stared at my hands, my own damn hands, and did the math. It wasn't complicated. My birthday is July 2nd, 1991. This document, this official, stamped and signed piece of paper, claimed my father had died nearly 3 years before I was even conceived. I scrambled to pick it up again, my hands shaking so badly I could barely read the text. This wasn't a copy. It had the raised county seal, the slightly faded blue ink of a real signature. It was real, and in that dusty, quiet attic, surrounded by a lifetime of loving memories, the only thought I could form was that my entire life, my very existence, was built on an impossible foundation. I must have sat there for an hour just staring at the certificate, my phone clutched in my other hand. The urge to call my dad Finn was overwhelming. What would I even say? Hey dad, funny story, I just found a document that says you died in a car crash back when Reagan was president. How's the bird feeder? I couldn't. The logical first step, the only step, was my mom, Elena. She would have an explanation, she had to. I drove to their house, the death certificate tucked into my jacket pocket like a loaded gun. When I got there, she was in the kitchen, humming along to some old song on the radio while kneading dough. The scene was so painfully normal, so domestic, it felt like a slap in the face. Lars, what a nice surprise, she said, wiping floury hands on her apron. You just missed your father, he went to the hardware store. Mom, we need to talk. My voice came out harsher than I intended. Her smile faltered, she saw the look on my face, the tension in my shoulders. What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. The irony of that statement was not lost on me. I didn't say anything, just pulled the folded paper from my pocket and laid it on the kitchen island, right next to a bowl of rising dough. I expected confusion. I expected her to laugh it off, to tell me it was a weird mix-up, some clerical error from a bygone era. What I got was a reaction that confirmed my deepest fears. Her face didn't just go pale, it was as if all the blood drained out of it at once, leaving behind a waxy gray mask. Her hands flew to her mouth and a small, strangled gasp escaped her lips. She stared at the document, not with curiosity, but with the horrified recognition of someone seeing a long-buried nightmare claw its way back to the surface. Where did you get this? She whispered, her voice trembling. Grandma's chest. Mom, what is this? It says Dad. It says he died in 1988. She snatched the paper off the counter, her movements jerky and frantic. You shouldn't have been digging through her things. These are private. Private? It's my father's death certificate. How is that private? My voice was rising, a tremor of panic creeping in. It's not real. It's a joke, a sick, horrible joke somebody played a long time ago. But her eyes told a different story. They were wide with terror, darting around the room as if looking for an escape. Then why are you so scared? If it's a joke, just tell me, we can laugh about it. Mom, please. Stop it, Lars, she snapped, her voice cracking. She shoved the certificate into her apron pocket. There is nothing to talk about, it's a mistake, an administrative error, you need to forget you ever saw this. For the good of this family, for your father's sake, you will drop this right now. Do you understand me? The way she said it, the sheer desperation in her voice. It wasn't a mother reassuring her son, it was a cornered animal. And in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that this was no mistake, it was a secret. A huge, terrifying secret that she would do anything to protect. And telling me to forget it was like telling me to forget how to breathe. Her reaction was a brick wall. Worse, it was a brick wall she was actively building right in front of me. Pushing her would do nothing but make her fortify it. So I left, mumbling something about having to get to work, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. The second I was back in my car, I pulled out my phone and took several high-resolution photos of the death certificate before she could decide to burn it. The image felt toxic even on my screen. The drive home was a blur. My mind was a chaotic mess of possibilities, each one more insane than the last. Was I adopted? Was this Finn a different person and my real dad took his name? Was my mom part of some witness protection program? The theories spiraled into absurdity. I needed facts. I needed something solid to anchor myself to before I completely lost my mind. That night, I locked myself in my apartment and became a digital ghost hunter. The certificate was my Rosetta Stone. It had the name Finn Anderson, the date of death, and crucially the place, Clackamas County, Oregon, a small rural area we'd moved away from when I was just a toddler. I barely remembered it. I started with the basics, simple Google searches, nothing. Then I moved on to paid services, genealogy websites, and online newspaper archives. For hours, all I got were dead ends. It was like the man on the certificate had never existed, except for this one official document claiming he had ceased to. My frustration grew, my eyes burning from staring at the screen. I was about to give up, to chalk it all up to some unsolvable mystery when I tried a broader search. Instead of his full name, I just searched for fatal accidents in Clackamas County in October 1988, and then I found it. It was a short, poorly scanned article from a local paper, the Molella Pioneer. The headline was simple, "Local man dies in fiery crash." My heart pounded as I zoomed in on the grainy text. The article described a single-vehicle accident on a remote highway. A Ford pickup truck had lost control on a wet road and hit a tree, bursting into flames. The driver, pronounced dead at the scene, was identified as 23-year-old Finn Johansson. Johansson, not Anderson. I stared at the two names side by side on my screen. Anderson, Johansson, they were so close, a typo, a clerical error just like my mom had claimed, but in a different way. The article was frustratingly vague, with no photo of the victim. It mentioned he was a resident of a nearby town and that services would be held privately. It was just a small-town tragedy, a blip in the local news cycle from over 30 years ago. But it was something. It was the first piece of the puzzle that wasn't just in my head or in that cursed document. It was a real event, a real death. The problem was, instead of clarifying anything, it just deepened the mystery. Was the man in the crash my father, his name misspelled in the paper? Or was the name on the death certificate the mistake? Or, the most chilling possibility of all, were they two different people? I felt like I was standing at a fork in the road, with both paths leading into a thick, impenetrable fog. I was completely stuck. I had two conflicting pieces of information, a mother who was acting like a terrified secret agent, and a father who was, for all I knew, completely oblivious. I felt isolated, like I was the only person on earth who knew this fragile, terrifying truth. And that's when I did what any confused and desperate person in the 21st century does. I turned to the internet for help. I created a throwaway account and posted on a subreddit dedicated to unsolved mysteries. I kept the title simple, "Found My Dad's Death Certificate." It's dated 3 years before I was born, help. I laid it all out. The chest, the certificate, my mom's bizarre reaction, the newspaper clipping with the similar but different name. I uploaded the photos of the documents, redacting the personal information. Then I hit post and waited, half expecting to be called a liar or a troll. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Theories poured in. Witness protection, long-lost twins, elaborate insurance scams. Most of it was wild speculation, but it was comforting to know I wasn't screaming into the void. I spent the next day obsessively refreshing the page, responding to comments, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie with these anonymous strangers. Then a private message appeared in my inbox. The username was something generic like Old Timer 72. The message was short and grammatically messy. "Son, I think I remember your grandmother. lived in Estacada back in the late 80s, a sweet woman but sad, always sad after the accident. My name is Alistair. My fingers trembled as I typed back. Do you remember the accident? Do you remember Finn? His reply came a few minutes later. I remember the talk, the whole town was talking, tragic. But the name I remember folks whispering it wasn't just Finn. There was another boy, always with Finn, got into trouble together. Soren, that was his name. I remember your grandma crying on her porch one afternoon, just rocking back and forth. She said something to me I never forgot. She said, Finn and that boy Soren, they ruined everything. Zoran, the name hit me like a physical blow. It was completely new. It wasn't on the death certificate, not in the newspaper article. It was a ghost, a third player in a drama I never knew existed. Who was Soren and how was he connected to this? Alistair didn't have much more information. He was old, his memory hazy on the details. He said my family moved away suddenly a few months after the crash. He remembered my mom, Alina, being pregnant. He wished me luck and said he hoped I found peace. Peace. The idea seemed laughable. I didn't have peace. I had a new name, a new thread to pull. And a growing dread that pulling it would unravel everything I had ever known to be true about my family, my father, and myself. Soren. The name echoed in my head for days. It felt significant, a key, but I had no door to put it in. How do you find someone from 30 years ago with just a first name and a vague connection to a tragedy? It seemed impossible, but Alistair's message had given me a new weapon, a location, Estacada, the small town mentioned in the newspaper article. I started a new, frantic search, this time focusing on Soren. I scoured old high school yearbooks from the area that had been digitized. I cross-referenced public records, looking for anyone named Soren who would have been in their early 20s in 1988. It was a grueling, soul-crushing process. I found a dozen Sorens, but none seemed to fit. They were too old, too young, or had moved to the area years after the accident. Just as I was about to give up, I stumbled upon a comment on an old forum post about a local Estacada band from the 80s. The comment from 2007 just said, "Man, I remember these guys." Soren was a wild drummer. Wonder what ever happened to him after Finn died. My blood turned to ice. There it was, Finn and Soren linked. The commenter's profile was still active. I sent a message, my heart hammering, explaining I was a researcher looking into the town's history. It was a weak lie, but it was the best I could come up with. To my astonishment, he replied. He said he didn't know much, but he thought Soren had ended up working down at the shipyards in Portland after the accident. He gave me a last name, Larson, Soren Larson. It took me another week of deep diving, of sifting through public records and social media profiles. Finally, I found him. A man in his late 50s named Soren Larson, listed as a crane operator at the Port of Portland. His profile picture was grainy, showing a man with a weathered face and tired eyes standing in front of a massive cargo ship. He looked nothing like my father, and yet I knew I had to know. I found his address. It was in a rundown part of the city, a small house with a peeling paint job and a yard full of neglected rose bushes. I drove there on a Saturday morning, my stomach in knots. I had no plan. I just knew I had to see his face to ask him. I parked across the street and watched his house for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the front door opened and the man from the photo stepped out. He was carrying a bag of groceries. He looked older in person, with a pronounced limp I hadn't noticed before. This was it. I got out of my car, my legs feeling like lead, and walked across the street. Soren Larson, I called out. He stopped and turned, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. He had the wary look of a man who expects bad news. Yeah, who's asking? His voice was rough like gravel. I couldn't form the words I'd rehearsed. My throat was tight. I just pulled out my phone, my hand shaking, and showed him the photo of the death certificate. His reaction was not what I expected. There was no shock, no denial. The wariness in his eyes was replaced by a profound, soul-deep weariness. He stared at the screen for a long, silent moment. The bag of groceries slipped from his hand, a carton of eggs cracking audibly on the pavement. He didn't even flinch. He just looked up from the phone, his gaze meeting mine, and in his tired, gray eyes I saw a flicker of recognition, and something that looked terrifyingly like pity. I always knew this day would come, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You have her eyes. Come inside, kid, it's a long story. His house smelled of stale coffee and sawdust. We sat at a small, wobbly kitchen table, the silence stretching between us, thick and heavy. He didn't offer me a drink. He just sat down, ran a hand over his tired face, and began to talk. And with every word, the foundation of my life crumbled into dust. The man who died in that crash in 1988 was, indeed, Finn Anderson. He was Soren's best friend. And he was my mother's boyfriend. Finn, he was a good guy deep down, Soren said, his voice raspy, his eyes fixed on some distant point in the past. But he was a mess, a real mess. He had a charm that could talk an angel into sin, and he used it to get into trouble. Gambling was his poison. He owed money, a lot of money to some very bad people. He told me that Finn was reckless, charismatic, and spiraling out of control. My mother, Alina, loved him, but she was terrified of the world he was dragging her into. The threats, the late-night visits from collectors, the constant fear. The night of the crash, Soren continued, his voice dropping lower, Finn was drunk, he just lost big again. He was driving like a maniac, saying he was going to skip town, leave it all behind. I was with him, I tried to stop him, tried to get him to pull over. He paused, swallowing hard. He lost control on that curve, the truck, it went airborne, I was thrown clear. He wasn't. Soren was the one who crawled away from the wreckage, bruised and battered but alive. Finn was gone, and in the immediate chaotic aftermath, a desperate plan was born. Alina was already pregnant with me, and the father wasn't Finn, it was Soren. A secret affair, a moment of comfort sought in the midst of the chaos Finn had created. Finn's debts didn't die with him, Soren said, finally looking at me. Those people, they wouldn't have cared, they would have come after Alina after the baby. They would have taken everything. So with the help of my grandmother, who loved Alina like her own daughter and despised the danger Finn had brought into their lives, they made an impossible choice. Soren Larsson, the quiet boy who had survived, would cease to exist. He would become Finn Anderson. He took his dead friend's name, his identity, and his child, and with Alina he vanished. They moved away, started a new life, and buried the truth so deep they hoped it would never be found. My grandmother kept the real death certificate, a single, secret token of the truth, a memorial to the boy she had once known and the lie they had all chosen to live. He was my father. This stranger, this tired man with sad eyes sitting across from me was my biological father. The man I knew as Finn Anderson, the man who taught me how to fish and fix a car, had spent 30 years living under a dead man's name to protect me. My entire life, my name, my very identity was a shield, a lie forged from love and fear. I drove home in a daze. The world outside my windshield looked the same, but it was all a set piece now. When I pulled into the driveway, he was there, my father, Finn Soren. He was on the lawn, patiently untangling the garden hose, whistling a tune I've known my whole life. He looked up and gave me his usual warm, crinkle-eyed smile, and I couldn't say a word. I just nodded, went inside, and shut the door to my old bedroom, the lie of my entire life pressing in on me from all sides. How can you hate a man who erased himself for you? How can you look at him the same way ever again? Final update. Hey everyone, I don't even know how to start this. First, thank you, especially to the old-timer who gave me the name. You changed my life, I found him, I found the truth. And it's worse and more complicated than any of the theories we had. There was no twin, no witness protection, no scam. There was just a car crash, a terrified pregnant girl, and a choice. A choice made to protect a baby from some very bad people. My dad, the man who raised me, isn't the man on that death certificate. He took his dead friend's name to give me a life. He's been living as a ghost for 30 years so I could be real. I have my answer, but I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. Every memory, every photo on the wall is both real and a lie. I got the truth, but I think I lost myself in the process. I don't know what I'm going to do now.